Imagine a chilling scenario, an abrupt awakening in the pre-dawn hours, a sense that something is off, a creak on the floorboards, a cold gust from a door left ajar. Then the terrifying realization: someone is inside your home, not just a thief, but someone with dark intent. For one family in Chesterfield, Massachusetts, this nightmare became real. A quiet, rural town with fewer than 2,200 residents, Chesterfield isn't the kind of place where people expect violence. But in the early hours of December 27, 2022, just after Christmas, that peace was shattered. Brian Camp lived there with his girlfriend, Brooke, and their 2 young children. The couple's relationship had been rocky, but they were reunited for the holidays. Around midnight, Brooke awoke, sensing something wrong. She heard a noise. When she woke Brian, he dismissed it and went back to sleep. But Brooke couldn't shake her unease. She got up to check and saw a man in the hallway. Her scream jolted Brian awake. The intruder lunged. A brutal struggle erupted. The man, larger than Brian, clearly intended harm. As Brooke called 911, Brian fought desperately. The battle spilled through the house. Furniture toppled, objects were used as weapons. Brooke struck the intruder with a glass object, wounding him. The moment gave Brian a chance. He broke free, ran to the kitchen, grabbed a firearm and fired. The bullet struck the intruder in the abdomen, ending the chaos. When deputies arrived, they found the man gravely wounded. He was identified as Jonathan Latender, Brooke's former supervisor and someone she had briefly dated during a breakup from Brian. She told police Jonathan had taken their split badly. Jonathan died from his injuries. Brian suffered multiple hand fractures. No charges were filed initially, but as investigators began piecing together the scene, they didn't yet realize how crucial the next 8 minutes would be. In the days following the shooting, detectives began carefully piecing together the truth. They analyzed the 911 call, reviewed Brian's statement, examined the autopsy results, and reconstructed the scene. At first, it appeared to be a clear case of self-defense, until one discovery changed everything. An enhanced review of the 911 audio revealed something chilling. A second gunshot, fired 8 minutes and 37 seconds after the first. This directly contradicted Brian's claim that both shots, if there were 2, were fired in rapid succession. Suddenly, what once seemed justified began to look calculated. In June 2023, 6 months after the incident, Brian Camp was indicted for manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that while the initial shot may have been lawful, the second crossed a critical line. The indictment divided public opinion. Some saw it as a betrayal of a man who defended his family, while others believed the second shot turned the act into something darker. The case went to trial in November 2024. Prosecutors opened with a disturbing timeline. They acknowledged that the first shot, striking Jonathan in the side, was likely justified. The hollow point round shattered a rib and tore through his stomach, liver, and colon. He collapsed, bleeding and groaning in pain. Instead of rendering aid or checking on the children, Brian retrieved clothing, gave items to Brooke outside, and called his boss. He then returned to the scene, took photos of Jonathan, and 8 minutes later fired a second shot, this one to the back of Jonathan's head. The medical examiner confirmed 2 distinct wounds, one to the abdomen and a fatal gunshot to the skull. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in Jonathan's system. Prosecutors argued this was not self-defense, but an execution. The defense pushed back, saying Jonathan still posed a threat. Brian testified that Jonathan appeared to be moving and trying to get up, prompting him to fire again. He admitted to taking photos and calling his boss for advice on documenting the scene. But inconsistencies emerged. Under cross-examination, Brian admitted he had initially denied firing a second shot or re-entering the kitchen. Now, he cited emotional shock and memory lapses. Prosecutors called it a lie, highlighting his vivid recollection of changing clothes and texting, yet foggy details about the fatal. As the trial progressed, jurors were immersed in a clash of narratives, one of home defense, the other of cold-blooded retaliation. They heard 911 recordings, expert testimony, emotional accounts, and Brian Camp's own words. They saw the photos he took of Jonathan. One in particular showed the wounded man clutching the back of his head, just moments before the fatal shot. Prosecutors relentlessly emphasized the time gap between the two gunshots. Jonathan, they argued, had been incapacitated by the first wound. The second shot, fired 8 minutes later, was not an act of fear, but an act of retribution. But the defense pushed back hard. Fear, they said, doesn't follow logic or timing. This wasn't a calm, calculated moment. It was the chaos of a terrifying night. With 2 young children in the house and an armed intruder who had declared his intent to kill, Brian believed the threat wasn't over. They pointed out that Jonathan had broken in with a knife and handcuffs. The defense asked jurors to imagine what could have happened had Brian hesitated. Brian testified that he believed Jonathan was still dangerous. He said the intruder appeared to be trying to push himself up, prompting him to fire a second shot from 10 to 15 feet away. He insisted it wasn't meant to kill, only to stop further danger. Prosecutors challenged that account, citing inconsistencies between Brian's story and the forensic evidence. They questioned the trajectory of the fatal bullet, the angle, and whether Jonathan, badly wounded and moaning, could have realistically been a threat. They also highlighted Brian's decision to photograph the scene and call his boss instead of helping the dying man. In closing arguments, prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had taken control of the situation and then chosen to execute his intruder rather than wait for the law. The defense described a man thrust into a nightmare, doing everything he could to protect his family from a violent attacker. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: not guilty. The decision shocked some and relieved others. For Brian Camp, it was the end of a harrowing 2-year legal ordeal. But for many, the case left unsettling questions about the limits of self-defense, the psychology of trauma, and how thin the line can be between protection and punishment.